Thank you for joining us to discuss an important subject in lifelong learning.
We're not quite ready, Mark.
Really, it says live on my end. Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us to discuss an important subject in lifelong learning, corporate issued credentials. I'm Mark Luba with IMS Global. All across the world, industries, employers, and educators, both traditional institutions and non-traditional providers, are intently engaged in finding solutions to the need for a skilled workforce. In addition to hiring employees, reskilling, upskilling, and retention are hugely important topics for corporate leaders facing a competitive market for talent. In response to these challenges, a growing number of corporate organizations are defining and issuing skills-based credentials as part of their own training and education programs. Today, our panel of experts will share their knowledge of what's happening and their views of the long-term implications of corporate issued credentials. We're very fortunate to be joined by two distinguished researchers studying issues of education to work, along with the leaders of two programs that are helping set the pace for these credentials. Before we speak with the panelists, please note the Q&A button on the right-hand side of your webpage. Please use that to submit questions, and we'll try to get to those as time allows. We have a very packed and interesting discussion ahead of you. So let's get started. I'm going to ask each of you panelists to please introduce yourselves and share your background and your interest in credentials. We'll go alphabetically. Let's start with Elisa.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. I'm Elisa Jacobs. I'm a Director of Global Learning and Development at PwC, and I lead our Network Badge program. I am a learning professional through the course of my career, an instructional designer at heart in everything that I do. So I love the rigor of credentials and making sure that the skills that everybody needs within their career at present and their career to come are at the center of everything that we do. So that's my area of interest. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Elisa. Holly?
Sorry, I thought you were going alphabetically. I'm used to going last. Thanks. Hi, I'm Holly Zanville. I'm a research professor and co-director of a new program on skills, credentials, and workforce policy at George Washington University. Last December, I left Lumina Foundation after about 15 years, where I worked on 4 portfolios over the years, a research portfolio, student success strategies, adult learners, and the future of learning and work. And prior to Lumina, I worked for 20 years in a higher education system office doing academic program reviews for the public four-year institutions in Oregon, working with the continuing education unit statewide, working then on developing distance education or online programs and policies with teacher education and engineering programs, especially around statewide and collaborative efforts, including efforts to attract diversity to those professions. And I'll mention 5 main interests now because I think they're so relevant to today's conversation that I'm focusing on in the broad learn and work ecosystem of the US. First, I'm co-leading with Nan Travers at SUNY Empire State College and Larry Good from the Corporation for Skilled Workforce, a new national initiative called Credential As You Go, which has a goal to transform the current degree-centric system to an incremental credentialing system that recognizes valuable learning in smaller units, and it will be fairer to all students. I'm also leading an effort to develop a learn and work ecosystem library, a digital library that will collect, curate, and coordinate resources to support a variety of credentialing initiatives in a climate in which we just don't have enough information that we can share about what is going on. Third, I'm very interested, like so many of you, in what's happening outside the US because many nations are addressing the same issues we are, and actually many nations are ahead of the US. So we have much to learn from what's going on internationally. Fourth, and this is so germane to today's conversation, I'm very interested in what employers are doing in this space, particularly those that have moved to offer their own credentials in partnership with traditional college and universities, but really on their own. And what happens when and if and it's not if, because they are. Many of the companies are beginning to act like a mini higher ed system. What can we learn from that? Can we understand whether or not it's ideal for the nation to have corporate credentialing occurring outside the traditional systems, and what can be done to improve the nation's landscape around learn and work ecosystems? And the last one I put on the list for my interest areas, sorry, I always have very broad interests, are on quality and value. How are we going to determine and assess the quality around all of our credentials and the value, especially when we're expecting to see not only more credentials on their own, but combos of credentials, and particularly those where corporate credentials may be aligning closely with traditional colleges and universities. So I'll stop there, but to let you know, I have very broad interests in this very important area of credentialing.
Thank you, Holly. Lisa?
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me. I'm Lisa Gevelber, and I founded and run a program at Google called Grow with Google, which is our big initiative to help make sure that everyone can live up to their economic potential. It's all about making sure the opportunities that are created by technology are truly available to everyone. And back in 2018, we launched our very first Grow with Google career certificate, with the idea that, you know, 2/3 of Americans and similar percentages in other countries around the world aren't today getting college degrees, and therefore feel really locked out of good jobs. And that's obviously, you know, a huge issue for lots of people. It's also an issue for the world's employers, right? You know, PwC's research with CEOs says 4 out of 5 CEOs say that, you know, skilling the talent in their workforce is an enabler or prohibitor or a barrier to growth in their companies, a significant barrier if they can't do it. So we at Google have been building career certificates now to help level the playing field and ensure that regardless of your educational or work background, you have an opportunity to get a job in a high paying, you know, high growth career field. And so we now have 4 certificates, and really our interest in the field is around creating a more equitable and inclusive job market.
Thank you, Lisa. Sean?
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. Good to be here. I'm Sean Gallagher. I'm at Northeastern University and the Center for the Future of Higher Education and Talent Strategy. For the last 20 years, I've focused on studying trends in higher ed and in the workforce. And really, our focus is on the intersection of the world of work and the world of post-secondary learning, aiming to impact the market by developing new models and ultimately eliminate the gaps between work and learning. So credentials are a big part of that, whether it's understanding employer demand and behaviors, or what's happening in terms of the new types of providers and innovations and what's happening in the traditional college and university system. So we analyze all of that and publish research regularly.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you all again. Holly and Sean, you have individually researched and published extensively on education leading to employment, as you said, and you've co-authored pieces as well. These questions are for both of you. There seems to be more awareness and a focus on corporate issued credentials in recent times, but has there actually been growth? And if so, why? What are the motivations for the companies involved?
Do you want me to start, Holly?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So a lot of this innovation and credentialing that we've seen over the last decade, I think you could call it originally more of a supply-driven phenomenon, where there were new credentials offered and everyone started issuing badges, and new organizations and coding boot camps, et cetera, came along. And you just had this burst of offerings in the market. And for many years, although there was all kinds of evidence of uptake, we didn't have a lot of hard data. We still don't. And that's one of the answers to the question is, unfortunately, you can't go to an IPEDS database from the US Department of Ed or another source and see, okay, here are the exact trends and how many credentials are issued, who's issuing them, et cetera. But over the course of the pandemic, and based on some research we've done just looking at private data sets, and you can think about all kinds of proxies for this, right? Google searches enrollments in short form programs among the couple of publicly traded ed tech companies that we have. Sort of spot surveys that I've done with Holly, where we've engaged some employers, including Google and IBM and HubSpot and others, to talk about what's happening with demand for these offerings. And what we found was most issuers of credentials, often online, grew about 70% in the pandemic. So over the course of 2020, pretty big leap, right? Almost a doubling. So there's growing evidence when you can get various data points that there's more demand, there's more consumer and professional enrollment. Wasn't necessarily the case a few years back.
So I'll just add to that. One of the questions is then I think the need to unbundle the terms company or corporate issued credentials, because it appears to us as though some of the companies are working closely with colleges and universities to offer badges or have industry awarded certifications, let's say embedded or coupled with traditional degrees. Some of the companies are doing things on their own, and it wasn't clear to us whether or not there's going to be more of all of the above. And in fact, I personally think from just conversations, we don't have great data on this, but I personally think that is going to be all of the above. And when we're trying to understand why, because employers are such a driver of the changes in the credentialing system. I kind of like to look at the report that many of you know about that Credential Engine puts out. They've been doing it every year. I'm not sure they'll continue to do it annually, but it's that report called Counting U.S. Post-Secondary and Secondary Credentials. And it really tries to describe the landscape of the U.S. credentialing system. So the latest report, which came out several months ago, found more than 950,000 unique credentials in the U.S. alone, and they were in 16 credential categories across 4 credential types of providers. Well, 2 of them could be corporate, but it's not clear how much of the data is coming in from on the company side. So 550,000 of the 960,000 are coming from MOOCs, which includes course completion certificates, micro-credentials, online degrees from foreign universities, and non-academic providers. So probably companies are in those spaces. And among those, it's badges, course completion certificates, licenses, certifications, and apprenticeships. I think we need better data on what the companies are doing so we have a better sense of that. But the report the year before had 600,000 something. And it's not entirely because of the growth of credentials. What happened is that there are better techniques now to pull in better data, but there has been a lot of growth. And in my mind, I don't know if it matters exactly what the number is. The fact is there's growth anecdotally. The companies and others are saying there's going to be more of it. And I've had the good fortune to sit in on some discussions with some industry certification organizations who sit on top of many, obviously many thousands and thousands of industry certifications. And when we ask them, is there going to be more of this? We keep hearing, yes, there will be. And then the question is, how will it be incorporated or aligned with our other credentialing structures like college and university? So I think the answer is yes, there's growth. Employers are, I think, the biggest driver in all of this.
Thank you. Thank you both. Lisa and Elisa, as issuers of credentials, who is your target audience? Lisa?
Sure. Well, as I said, Mark, at the beginning, our target audience was really initially the, 80 million American adult workers who don't have a college degree, and really helping those folks. And still today, we find 60% of our graduates are folks without degrees, but we also see that 40% of our learners actually have degrees. And so it's been interesting for us as we've dug into why are folks with degrees already, in addition, pursuing a certificate. And really what we are learning both qualitatively and quantitatively, if you look at data from sources like Burning Glass, is that people with degrees actually know that they, in many cases, will be more employable at higher wages if they complement the degree they have with a certificate. Especially folks who come from liberal arts backgrounds like myself. I had a psychology degree. I think Burning Glass data says that people with a psychology degree these days make on average $39,000 a year coming out of school. But if they complement it with a data analytics certificate, they make more like 60, and hundreds of thousands more jobs are available to them. So what we see is that learners are choosing to, in many cases, complement the degree they have with a certificate. And we've been partnering, with educational institutions all along as part of the Google Career Certificates. We've been partnering with community colleges and career and technical high schools. We have over 200. And now we're partnering more and more with four-year universities. But I think the common thread across all of it is, our target is anyone who's really looking to gain some economic mobility, who's looking to get into an in-demand, high-growth, high-paying job. We teach 4 fields. We teach data analytics, IT support, user experience design, and project management. And I think that the folks we're trying to reach are people who are aspiring to get into those fields. And so that's really how our target is played out. And we've been really pleased. We are definitely reaching people from lower income backgrounds. 46% of our graduates come from the lowest income tertile in the country, and they're graduating from our program. 53% of our graduates are from backgrounds that are traditionally underrepresented in tech careers. So minorities, women, veterans. So, we're excited to see that it is really helping people achieve economic mobility, and that these partnerships with, educational institutions, I think, will just make this better and better for so many more people.
Thanks. Thank you. Elisa, same question about your target audience, and perhaps you could tell us more about the PwC program.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. So our program, the Network Badge Program, is specifically for our existing staff and partners that are across our global network of firms. We, as a business, operate in over 150 different countries, and each of those is its own individual organization. So we work as a network. So our program is centered globally within our Center of Excellence, and each individual member firm is eligible or able to opt into the program as they wish. So we started this out as a pilot. I can talk a little bit more about that later as needed. But regardless of, somebody's business unit, whether they work in our consulting practice, our audit practice, or tax practice, regardless of their level, regardless of their specific role, there are badges within our program that any individual can earn. So we're really, pretty holistic as far as the things that we're offering within our portfolio for that. Our audience, the people that come to PwC traditionally over time have had a 4-year degree, although that is shifting over time too, to some extent. We're trying to move the needle a little bit and be more inclusive in our hiring practices as well. That's really important to us. And really the key thing here is that we want to offer this as upskilling and incentive and, investment in our existing people. So it's really for those at PwC today.
Very well, thank you. Back to you, Lisa. I wanted to pose a question, but also offer you the opportunity, if you had anything further you'd like to talk about the Google program, please do. And then address this question. It's our perception, I think widely held, that in order to scale an ecosystem where credentials reliably signal employability, there needs to be widespread trust in the quality and the validity of the credential. That in order to have that near certainty that the holders really do have the stated skills. So again, feel free to expand on your discussion of the Google program. And could you talk about what you think is necessary to establish that trust in the credentials that one organization issues and perhaps others are, really need to be able to value?
Sure. So, the Google Career Certificates are built in a very particular way. We build them starting with Google experts in each field from the job back. So we start with a skills assessment, a task analysis. We really think about the job the person's going to be doing, and then the experts build the curriculum from there. But we don't stop there, actually. We engage employers in the curriculum building, because at the end of the day, nobody's doing training to be trained. They're doing training to get to a better job and hopefully a better life. And so it has to be about employability. So that's why we have, from the get-go, created a hiring consortium. And right now we have over 130 employers who are committed to recruiting people like the Google Career Certificate graduates into their firms. And so many of those employers actually provided input into the actual curriculum. And we love that because it means that we know we're teaching what employers want to hire for, right? So a good example is Deloitte, who gave us some of the assessments that they use to test people's mastery and knowledge around data analytics. And then we built those assessments right into the Google Career Certificate. And all of our certificates are also deliberately very rigorous. There are over 100 hours of content, but also over 100 assessments. And you have to pass within 80% or better all of the required assessments to earn the credential. Because again, our goal isn't to give people a badge or a credential. Our goal is to help people be successful in these jobs. And to do that, you have to assess mastery along the way. And so I think one of the ways that we help ensure that our credential is high quality and trustable is that we have employers' input from the beginning. We build it from the job back. We have a full hiring consortium of employers who are hiring for graduates of our certificate program. And it's the same content we use at Google to teach our own people. The whole program actually started because we were trying to diversify our hiring in IT support, and that was our first credential. We still use this material to teach our own IT support people. We use it to teach our data analytics people. So I think the quality assurance is partly that firms are hiring folks with this credential, including Google, and that we're using it also to train our own folks. And we have very positive results. Our graduates tell us, 82% of them, that they got a positive career outcome within about 6 months of graduating with a certificate. And that could be they got a raise, a promotion, or even a really new and different jobs. So those are some of the ways that we think help instill trust in our program.
Thank you. Elisa, thinking about trust and being able to signal that reliably, how much is that factored into your design, and what other thoughts do you have that you can share?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. As a professional services firm, trust is everything to us. Reputation, our clients absolutely require that they can trust us and be confident in what we're going to deliver. So let me tell high level the story of our badge program at PwC. We've been looking at the whole scope of credentials that our people possess for quite some time and have been looking at micro-credentialing for several years. Beginning in the last quarter of 2018 and leading up to that, we decided to pilot micro-credentials and badges in particular with our US firm. There were kind of two things that led us to that. One is recognition and emphasis on the high priority skills that we have agreed are important to the future of our business. So at that time, they were largely in the digital space. Over time, that's grown to include a few other things as well. And then secondly, there's the desire to recognize our people who are developing themselves and those important skills, and to do so in a way that we haven't done before. So although, really a network wide, whether you're part of our program or not, you have access to that upskilling content, that recognition is a little bit of an extra for the territories that have chosen to participate in our program. As a professional services firm, we have a long history of rigor and learning, and a lot of that has to do with the requirements of our regulators in keeping continuing professional education for, our CPAs and such. So it's something that we're very familiar and comfortable with. So we wanted to start growing into some of these new strategic areas for us that we knew were going to help us continue to work in delivering high quality work to our clients and doing so in a more timely and more cost-effective way to better meet needs. So as the pilot was decided and we knew kind of the scope of what those initial badges would focus on, we also needed to develop out our framework. So we focused a lot of attention on how we would make sure that there was consistent rigor, regardless of what the topic might be. That was really important, that it would be able to scale and work regardless of the topic. So we looked extensively at things like what Lumina Foundation has shared on credential frameworks. So thank you, Holly, for that. We spoke to colleagues at some other organizations that had kind of jumped into the space a little bit earlier than us. And we use those inputs to create something that works for us. So we do have different types and levels of badges in our framework, but a few things that are common across all of them are that all of them have, a specific learning component. So whatever that is, to understand new concepts and construct new knowledge, connecting to what they already know and bringing to the table. There's an application requirement for each of our badges so that they can demonstrate the skills that have been developed that are associated with that badge that will certify at the end that they have those. And then finally, an assessment component. So we do have a small dedicated team in our US firm that's focused on learning measurement and analytics, and they assist our subject matter experts with the development of our assessments that are quite rigorous. So from the time that we launched the pilot, which was October of 2018, that ran about 18 months. And as we were kind of nearing the end of that, we started scaling and looking at what it would mean to take badges to the rest of our network. Starting in April of last year, we had Mexico as our second member firm on board. And as I think maybe Sean mentioned earlier, in the pandemic, we actually saw all of our territories lean into this idea more than, we were a little concerned maybe they would lean out, but, everybody was really bought in and could very tangibly see the benefits of it, which is really encouraging. So since our initial pilot began, we've issued over 143,000 badges to over 90,000 people across our network. And we have 3/4 of our largest territories participating, with more to come this year. Some are very early days in their badges, but the excitement is growing, and that's really exciting for us. Our portfolio is relatively small when you look at some of the other programs that exist in the corporate space, but we did so intentionally because we know that there are already a number of things competing for our people's time. So we wanted to stay really focused on what those highest priority skills were that we want people to be developing, because we recognize anything, that's in a badge is actually on top of the technical content they have to learn specific to their role. In addition to some of the digital skills that we focused on initially, we have just recently added a more human-centered badge on inclusion and diversity topics. We know that continuing to move the needle on that is really essential to our business and our people. It's the culture that we want to create, is just to continue to grow in that space. And we are also growing some of our offerings in the AI space starting later this month. We've got 2 new badges. One will come out later this month and one later in our fiscal year. So that's exciting for us. We've got, I've talked really broadly about our network badge program. We are looking more holistically, as I mentioned, about credentials. And so another thing that we'll be launching shortly are some more business-focused micro-credentials that are specific to business units. But that pilot's still in the initial planning stages. So there's just a lot of great things happening, upskilling opportunities, recognition. And so, it's a great time to be engaged in credentials at PwC. But going back really briefly to your point about trust and the quality and validity of the credential, to me, it kind of comes down to 2 things. One is reputation, which I think we started talking about initially. Do you trust the issuer, for one thing? And the second piece that goes along with that is the consumer's understanding of the rigor behind that. Because for someone just to grant someone a badge, but not really understand the process that it took to get there, I think you miss out and really, having the full trust of what that is. So to me, those are really the 2 critical things in that regard. And we've been really mindful of that as we've gone through.
Thank you both. These are 2 very formidable programs, and it's quite impressive. And we're very glad to have you be able to describe this for us, because sometimes there's a misconception about the depth or the quality. And and validity of some of this work, and this is most impressive, so thank you. Sean and Holly, is accreditation or a formal quality assurance process necessary or beneficial in this paradigm? And if so, how should that be approached? A governing body, a centralized governing body, let the markets decide, or some blending of both of those, or some other model?
So I'll go first, Sean, if that's okay. So this question is one that is on the table now. Several of the regional accreditors, which are now institutional accreditors, since they don't have geographic boundaries guiding them anymore, are being asked by their institutions, are you going to review micro-credentials or our partnerships with companies or other newer alternative credentialing models, developments that are underway? And the regional accreditors haven't decided yet what they're going to do, but the traditional higher ed system is really founded on the notion that there should be third-party accreditation, and that the folks that are providing the key credentials, the degrees and other kinds of credentials, really doesn't provide a checks and balances system, and that we ought to think about, can we have some common standards among all our institutions? Can we classify all our credentials? Can we collect data on them so that we can see how we're doing as a nation? So what's being described, and this terrific to hear what's going on, both what Lisa and Elisa described, are still, I would argue, outside the traditional higher ed system. And so will some of those individuals who are clearly accessing some great careers and getting some excellent preparation by the companies, are any of them going to want to transfer, I'll use the word transfer, to a traditional college or university and seek a degree? And if they do, will the college university recognize that learning, or will they say, well, you have to start over, this work is not aligned, we don't know how to assess what you got at the company, at Google, for example, or can we really help the learner proceed? And that those are raising questions of quality and value. So I feel like we have lots of questions to ask ourselves around, are there checks and balances in place for the learners, regardless of where they decide to seek their first, second, third, fourth credentials? And we're talking about lifelong learning. So we know that the learners are going to go among all the different systems, and they're going to have something that carries them in some sort of a movable, a wallet of their learning. Can they transfer? Is there transparency in what the companies are offering that we can understand? Can the companies use a common language of credentialing that Credential Engine has developed, which is now being used, we think, more and more globally, so that we could have interoperable databases and understand all this? Do we know what's going on? And would even the companies provide their data on their enrollments and completions to something like the National Student Clearinghouse, so we could look at the value of what if you have a degree plus 3 badges plus something else, versus you have maybe a badge on its own? We can't answer any of these questions unless we conglomerate our information, and that's what's on the table for discussion, those quality and value questions, and who are the key players that are going to help to answer those. So I'll stop there, but I think this is a sticky set of questions we all have to ask ourselves.
Well, I certainly hope 2 of those players are on this call today, or more. Sean, do you have any other additional comments about this idea?
Holly put it well, and just those great descriptions of these 2 example programs. You know, they're robust, they're really intentionally designed. If there are colleges and universities participating and listening, I can imagine, and I work at one, and we think we do a very good job. Just picture someone in your department or in your program, and what's the level of rigor and focus and outcomes and employer engagement that they're bringing into their own program design, right? So it's interesting what employers and companies are doing. I would point out both to the general public, right? Kind of as a supplement or an alternative to what a college or some other entity might offer. You can just go enroll and get one of these certificates from Google, or an employer like PwC and others where your own workforce is being badged. And so this is a force to be reckoned with. And as Holly acknowledged, I think Lisa talked about as well, the fact that community colleges, major universities, we've done this at Northeastern and many others have as well, have accepted these employer issued credentials for credit, is really an endorsement once you've assessed it, of the quality and the value that can be there. And it does not fit within the traditional accreditation constructs. And really, we have kind of an open market today. I know there are 6 or 7 at least different entities that have been trying to get started over the last few years to basically be a quality assurance body of some sort for some of these more job-oriented programs. But I think, you know, the numbers speak to the demand and the growing interest, and we have to sort out as a community, how does all this fit together? How do the employer issued credentials plug in to or stack into degrees? And how can they become alternatives to degrees, especially as employers look more to skills-based hiring?
Lisa and Elisa, staying on this subject, what say you about external formal governance of some kind?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, you know, as Sean just mentioned, we've been partnering with academic institutions from career and technical high schools, and actually now some broader public school systems like the Anaheim Public School System, to community colleges and all the way up to 4-year institutions, many of whom have decided to either issue credit for prior learning or are building our certificates right actually directly into their curriculums. And so you know, we applied to the American Council on Education, ACE, and have received up to 12 credits for each of the Google Career Certificates now for all 4 of them. They have different amounts, but a few of them have 12. I think one has 10, if I'm not mistaken, credits. And a lot of schools look to ACE, I think, as a validator for how much credit they should give. Interestingly, we also have schools who are bundling deliberately our credential, our certificate, with some of their other curriculum and making a little mini program out of it and giving up to 40 credits for the full bundle. So I do think it's really important that these academic institutions are embracing this. I think, as I said earlier, the good for everyone, the good for student, good for the academic institution is hopefully it makes their graduates more employable at higher wages if they do some of these certificate programs like the Google Career Certificates. And so the way we've been doing it is working directly with ACE to have them evaluate our certificates. And I think a lot of schools look to ACE for how much credit they should give. And so that's been the model we've used to date.
Yeah, we're very much open to, you know, those partnerships. And in a number of our member firms, we do have partnerships with local universities or you know, country-based universities. So, you know, going back for many years, our UK firm, for example, has done an apprenticeship program for both our audit and consulting practices. And a number of other spaces, you know, that has either happened over time or is, you know, emerging as well. So we're very much, you know, interested in partnering in that space. And I think, you know, I'm personally all for some kind of common skills or credential taxonomy, or, you know, whatever that is, for us to kind of partner in and kind of agree as exchangeable currency when you think about the skills that people are bringing to the table. So that's definitely something that we think is important for the future.
There's certainly quite a number of projects that are happening in pursuit of that very concept. And IMS, that's just a plug for IMS's work, is we are very much supporting those efforts through the open standards that are published by our members. We haven't really addressed this directly, but it's been very strongly implied, and it ties into this whole idea of competition. You know, should or do educators feel that they're facing competition from the corporate organizations? And if so, rather than this looking at it as a zero-sum game, if you will, are there perhaps creative ways and models that could be, you know, pursued that would have the employers, and it sounds like Google's doing it already, working with the educators to co-develop the definition of these credentials? You see that happening? Sounds like you're already doing it, Lisa.
I mean, it's really been fun for us to see how different academic institutions want to engage with us. Like I said, there's a kind of a spectrum of what different people are doing, from, credit for prior learning all the way to building it into their catalog. Excuse me. Sorry. All the way up to people who are building on top of our credential. Sorry.
Do you ever get the sense that educators are feeling a degree of competition?
I mean, I'm sure there's all kinds of folks feeling different ways, but we're seeing so many people want to collaborate. Sorry, my throat. One example is Johns Hopkins. They built a credential that stacks on top of ours. So the idea is you could do the Google IT support certificate, but then if you wanted to become a healthcare IT support professional, you do the Johns Hopkins bit on top. And I think that's another really appealing model where everyone contributes what they're best at. We're not best at building a healthcare IT support credential, but Johns Hopkins is, and they don't want to build the basics that we know best. So actually, I think there's just tons of room for people to collaborate in this space, and we're always open to hearing folks who want to do stuff with us, like we call it build on top. Folks can reach out directly to me. My email is just my last name at google.com. So Gevelber at Google. If you're interested in doing a collaboration like that, we would certainly love to hear from you.
I don't think there's great data on how much of this collaboration there is underway, although there are clearly many flowers, many credentials blooming around the country through all kinds of partnerships. But I'm not so sure that there's the lion's share. I mean, there may be in business and certainly in IT and more in healthcare, but whether or not the liberal arts are there and other disciplines, and Lisa, I'm really happy to hear you were a psychology major, but I don't think there's enough of this blending. And that's what a lot of the discussions or the newer initiatives are about, is could industry certification associations meet universities, meet community colleges more and more, and determine whether or not there are some kind of blending or hybrids that would be win-wins for everybody. So I personally think we're at the beginning of a pretty major explosion, but there's a lot of work to do. And I don't think a lot of folks fully get how we could transform our systems if we work together. So I'm a little less optimistic. Maybe if it was 5 years from now, we no doubt will be way farther ahead. But I'm a little worried personally about whether or not we can truly transform our entire system, or whether or not what we're really noticing are the really great flowers that are blooming. But that's not the whole garden. So.
I'm optimistic too, and I feel like we kind of have to, given, the need to constantly be reskilling, given the competition for talent, given the need to equalize opportunities and bring more equity to what we're doing. I feel like really that's the business imperative, and I feel like it is maybe on the corporates to be pushing that as, urgently as we possibly can. I mean, I feel that as part of my responsibility, I know. And I'm hearing that from you as well, Lisa, which I think is just a lovely and wonderful thing. So I am really excited to see how we can move this forward as quickly as possible.
We just have two more minutes, so I'm going to jump to the final question. And it has to do, with, of course, with the learner worker. And it's a simple question. If we haven't already elicited what the benefits are, and we've mentioned a few of those, economic mobility, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion, perhaps, what other expected benefits might this world that we're talking through today, what other benefits might there be in store for the learner and worker? And what risks may be out there that perhaps you're worried about, but we haven't really mentioned? Who wants to go first?
I'll go quickly. I think navigation is a real challenge. So there's lots of opportunities here, but I think everyone's spoken one way or another to, if you are that learner, that consumer, that worker, how do you figure out what you need? And which one's right for you and what it could build into, and also what it isn't, right? These tend to be more affordable, right? And even just the idea that Johns Hopkins doesn't have to create a certain piece because Google has, in that example, there's an efficiency there when you think about the whole marketplace, right? We don't have to recreate the wheel. So maybe we end up with some best of breed credentials or curriculum, let's call it, and some of it's with institutions and some of it's with non-institutional providers. But if I'm a worker or an employer on the hiring side, there's a lot to sort out. And that's why I think the infrastructure and standards are so important.
I would just offer the word policy, particularly state policy, although federal policy is really important as we're considering whether or not we'll have federal funds that will support short-term credentialing, and that would include probably more individuals entering working with companies to pursue their first line, maybe credentials. But states have a tremendous role in determining how to sit on state and federal funds in order to guide people and support people into credentialing programs. What are they going to guide them into company programs? I feel like, I think state legislators and others are going to have to understand this changing world, and policy is going to be a really important component of that.
Very good. Other comments? Elisa? Expected benefits, perhaps
I think
risk?
the key benefit is greater agility for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's economic mobility, right? Really making sure that folks from all kinds of backgrounds have an opportunity to get good jobs.
Well, let's close there, because that's, I think, all of our hopes. So thank you very much, all of you. We're at time. And we did have two questions, one from Jeff and one from Brian and Suzanne. So those three questions, if it's okay, we will go ahead and send to either the whole group, or in some cases they're addressed, and ask if we can get responses back. So we'll be happy to facilitate that with my associates' help. So thank you all again for, it's been a really inspiring and eye-opening session on some fantastic work that's going on, both in your firms as well as your analysis and your understanding of the broad ecosystem. So I thank you all and appreciate your joining us today.